Hello once again, everybody, and thank you for joining me here on this Thursday, February 18th edition of ATS Radio. I'm your host, Adam Burke. I'll be joined today by Brad Powers, professional bettor and handicapper over at BradPowersSports.com, to talk some FCS college football and some college hoops on today's show. We are 1 week away from the release of my 2021 MLB betting guide, first time under the ATS name, previously, of course, under the Bang the Book name. Very excited to get that guide out to you. I've been very, very hard at work on that. Season win total previews for all 30 Major League Baseball teams, futures markets for the World Series, pennant, and divisions, plus player futures for the AL and NL Cy Young, AL, NL MVP, and the Home Run King as well. So all of that comes your way in the 2021 MLB betting guide, week away from releasing that here. It'll be an individual page format, web page format over at ATS.IO. It will be in a downloadable PDF so that you'll have the full guide right there in front of you. And I am hoping here, if I get the writing done in time, to put something together that looks like kind of a flip book, some sort of not interactive guide, but just something that looks a little bit better than just a black and white PDF. So trying to put a lot of things together here for this 2021 MLB betting guide. Should be a lot of fun. Very much looking forward to it. And, again, baseball kind of my thing here at ATS.IO, and looking forward to what I hope will be a very strong 2021 season. Also over at ATS.IO right now, picks and predictions for college basketball, the NHL, and the NBA. My situational betting articles get updated every Sunday night or Monday morning. Got golf previews for you, UFC previews, NASCAR previews, sportsbook reviews, top sportsbook promotions in the business. All kinds of great stuff over at ATS.IO for you to check out. And, of course, make sure you download the ATS app as well, which is a bet tracker, an odds screen, and you've got the opportunity to read all of the articles in that ATS app as well. So download that from the Google Play Store or the Apple Store today. We bring on today's guest. That is professional bettor and handicapper Brad Powers from BradPowersSports.com. And, Brad, how's it going today, man?
Man, it's going well. How you doing?
Oh, very well, buddy. Appreciate your time as always here, sir. And some internet issues on your end, maybe some spotty stuff on my end as well. So doing the best we can here to get something out for our listeners on this Thursday edition of the show. And, we usually talk college football pretty much on every episode with you. We find something to discuss. We'll talk a lot of FCS here. But first, before we get to that, you and I were talking about this before we started recording here today, Brad, that UCF upgrading at the head coach position, even though it's mid-February.
Hey, certainly, by getting, former Auburn coach Gus Malzahn, who, I'm not a huge fan of, but, I mean, anytime you can beat Nick Saban 3 different times, something nobody's done here in the last decade, and I get it, Auburn plays them every year, but still nobody else in the SEC has been able to do that. You get a guy that's been to a national title game, been to multiple big bowl games, competed with Saban, competed in the toughest division in college football. To get a guy with that kind of experience for UCF compared to Josh Heupel, their former head coach, who basically inherited an undefeated team and has seen that team get worse progressively, considerably, actually, with each passing year, especially this year. I think a major win for UCF. My only caveat to it, the only worry that I have is, Gus Malzahn the last couple of years at Auburn wasn't a go, rah guy, a very good recruiter. Maybe you don't have to recruit very hard as far as getting, you should be able to get in your car in the Orlando area and find enough talent. It's not like you got to be, hopping on a bunch of flights across the country, but still a very good hire for UCF. And obviously, easily one of the better group of 5 jobs in the country.
So as you're doing your preseason prep work here, and obviously it's a bit of a unique situation. Most teams kind of already have their affairs in order as far as the coaching staff goes and all of that. What does that do to a power rating for UCF in your mind?
Great question. Another negative would be how late in the process it is. So, the signing day is 2 weeks ago at this point. He's by far the latest hire at February the 18th. So that's kind of a negative. But I think him being an upgrade over Josh Heupel will probably even things out. I'm not going to boost UCF's power rating 3-4 points. But, normally I would be downgrading a team as far as a first season coach already missing a recruiting class, being very late in the process. So I think it'll even itself out. The major factor is going to be, what happens at the quarterback position. Dylan Gabriel, is he going to stay and be fine there for UCF? And what other roster additions and deletions they're going to have? That's going to be the major focus as far as my power rating. I'm guessing when it all shakes out, because UCF, in my opinion, really disappointed. I mean, I downgraded UCF's power rating significantly throughout the course of 2020. I'm guessing I'm going to come around to UCF's power rating is going to be 3 or 4 points higher in the preseason than what it was, right after the bowl game loss to BYU.
Well, and of course, I think too, something that's really beneficial for UCF here is that they should be able to get all their spring practices in. If this had happened in 2020 and then COVID hit and you don't get spring practice, that's a little bit different, because now you're talking about new schemes, new terminology, all that kind of thing with Malzahn there. So those players now have to spend the next 6 months or so learning a new system, kind of familiarizing themselves with it, getting into it, and all of that. And that's the importance, I think, of spring practices is, you can work in a lot of new things, in particular for teams that have new coaches. So, I saw Florida made an announcement that they're not having a spring game with fans, but they're doing all their spring practices and everything else. So that's a positive, at least that Malzahn gets to come in, have those spring practices. The players can kind of figure things out on the fly a little bit. He can actually see his personnel physically out there on the field. I think that's a benefit, relative to maybe what would have happened if this was the case last year. But I know you'll be watching those spring games very, very closely across the country here coming up.
Certainly will. And that's a major positive just for the game of college football. To get those practices. Keep in mind, almost most teams had 0 or 1 or 2 spring practices last year. So, and to go from that to actually having 15, regardless of if they're spring games with fans or not, just to actually have those practices is going to improve the quality of play during the fall. And with a product that, had some questionable TV ratings down the stretch, I want that product to be improved as a college football fan.
I guess I'm going to kind of put you on the spot here a little bit, but, and I don't know the dates for spring practices. I know some teams have already started. Some teams are starting very soon. In terms of the new coaches, which ones are you most intrigued with, especially in terms of following, some of the early returns from what they do in the spring?
Oh, wow. Gus Malzahn would probably be near the top of that list, just because, it's a big name at a program that I think at least the group of 5 level has a very high ceiling, as high a ceiling as any group of 5 job. On the downside of it, as far as the negative, I'm not a fan of Josh Heupel. I'm not a fan of the Tennessee program of where it's at, and a program that should be right behind Florida and Georgia in the division, in that Eastern division of the SEC. I think it's going to, struggle at the bottom of the SEC besides Vanderbilt, and obviously South Carolina's another intriguing, new head coach there in Shane Beamer. I think they're actually going to improve. It can't get much worse than what they were a year ago for the Gamecocks there. I know you follow them relatively closely. It's still early in the process for me. It's with the FCS going on now and me being involved in hoops, I don't really start diving in completely until, I would say the end of March. April's like a big month for me where I just basically go full-time college football from that point on. So I haven't given a thought as far as, guys that are really going to be a huge upgrade, guys that are going to be really a big downgrade. And let's be quite frank. It was kind of a ho-hum coaching carousel this year compared to past years.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I'm, of course, very interested in the Shane Beamer one. As you mentioned, my wife from South Carolina, become a Gamecocks fan. That's one that I'm definitely looking pretty closely at. Another one I'm looking at here, from a spring practice standpoint, is Utah State. Gary Anderson, I didn't like that hire to begin with. You and I blasted that hire here on the show quite a bit. It was just a very bland hire. I think the boosters just kind of strong-armed their way in a little bit to bring Anderson back. And it didn't work. The players didn't like him. He seems like he's just done with being a college football coach. Blake Anderson is a guy who went through a lot at Arkansas State, obviously. That Arkansas State was a springboard for coaches to jump, including Malzahn, for coaches to jump somewhere else to another job. Anderson was there for a long time, a stable guy, the whole thing with his wife, Wendy, and dying from cancer and all that. I can't blame him for looking for a chance to get out of Jonesboro. He goes to Utah State. This is going to be a very different culture with this program. Obviously, he has to kind of figure out ways to assimilate himself into, what we know about Utah culture and about the program and about the types of guys they wind up recruiting and all of that. But this is just going to be so much more positive of an environment, I think, that while Utah State may not have the most talent in the Mountain West, I do think that they will gravitate towards a guy like Anderson pretty quickly. So that's a team, if I'm kind of looking ahead, thinking about season win total markets and stuff like that, I feel like I'm going to give, kind of a favorable outlook for a team like Utah State.
Yeah, and I like teams that have, bottomed out or topped out as far as a power rating goes. And what do I mean by that? What I look to take advantage of are those outliers in a power rating who had historically poor and who had historically great seasons. Obviously, I downgraded Utah State's power rating about 2 touchdowns last year throughout the course of the season. What I look for regression towards the mean there. And it starts with, having a decent head coach in place. Anderson was, let go at the start of the season. They played basically with an interim. They had opt-outs and whatnot, a very disjointed roster. And then you just look at their 5, 6, 7 year, trajectory as far as Utah State. They're consistently more of a winning program. So I think you're onto something there. And not only on the Anderson side, him getting a kind of a fresh start there, but just, I like playing on the teams that bottomed out, Utah State being one of them. Obviously LSU will be improved. Michigan will be improved and whatnot. South Carolina, I look for to take a step up after they really bottomed out down the stretch there. So those are a couple. I guess the big one, and then I looked at some of the coaches, and I don't want to miss this one, but I do think Texas upgraded with Sarkisian. And it's not like Herman did a horrible job there. I love betting on Tom Herman in bowl games. And obviously Texas was 7-3. That's not going to cut it there. But, all 3 losses were close for the Longhorns. They just need a little bit. If you boost the Texas power rating 3-4 points, Texas finally, after it feels like a decade of wandering around in the wilderness, if they have hired the right guy, which I think they have, they're obviously right up there with Oklahoma. And I think it'd be good for college football to have another power outside of that Southeast region that dominates Clemson and the SEC.
Yeah, I think so too. That's an excellent point there to make about Sarkisian. But, that's still a few months down the road here before we have to look at win totals and games of the year and all those kinds of things. What's right in front of us right now is the FCS. We had one game last week, McNeese and Tarleton State. That one wound up going to double overtime, went over the total. One that had some points very late. So that was one that it was kind of a difficult pill to swallow starting off the FCS season for you. But we got a lot of games and a lot of opportunities here this week. So before we look at some games specifically, what is your approach? What are you sort of using as a guideline? Have you, put together some semblance of power ratings? Have you sort of picked up on some things in the market? What are you kind of doing here to prep for these games each week?
It's a great question. So normally I do my own FCS power ratings. I'm not doing anything else during the summer. I finish up my FBS work for the most part early on in the process because I have to. I have to be ready by the end of May in a lot of instances as far as season win totals. So I normally do my own FCS power ratings, but they mimic. If they're going to mimic any other public available power rating out there, it's Jeff Sagarin. Whether it's my FBS power ratings or my FCS, if someone were to ask me what, my power ratings most closely resemble, it's probably going to be Jeff Sagarin, outside of obviously some outliers and a few differences there. So what did I do this year? I'm an open book here. I just took the baseline, Sagarin's ratings, because I think they're pretty solid. Are they the end all? Can you make a ton of money betting on them? No, but they're at least a good baseline to get a starting power rating. And then it's just, old fashioned handicapping 101. Start diving in, start reading about teams. And especially with this season, because it's so different from other seasons. Some of the bets that I made early on in the process were teams that were maybe good last season by being last season, 2019. We're expected to be good this season, and there was just roster changes. Guys opted out. A lot of players they expect to be back just aren't there. That's where I started to find some, perceived value. We'll see what ends up shaking out, but start with Sagarin's Power Rating and just old school. Just go into the local newspapers and some of there's some national guys that I respect that do previews on FCS. Just start going to town, reading up on teams.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned the old school handicap, of doing the digging, doing the deep diving, looking at the local papers and stuff like that. And it's especially interesting, like we talked about last week, where you're going to see a lot more national coverage of FCS because the college football guys don't really have much to do at this time of the year usually, or the college football guys and girls, I should say, that cover the sport don't have much to do really in February, but now they do. So they're going to be looking for these storylines, these angles, stuff like that. And there probably will be some reactionary things in the marketplace to, some of these stories that get written up out there about different guys, different coaches, different teams, whatever else. So I think that it's all going to be a very interesting dynamic here. But I want to ask about market entry. Are you still playing these early in the week, trying to get out in front of lines? Are you waiting until later in the week when you have accumulated more information, have a higher degree of confidence? What's kind of your market entry approach?
Another great question, as usual. I'm firing away. If I feel like I got a pretty good number on a game, I fired in. There originally was 17 games scheduled for this week. Circa opened up a couple nights ago on Tuesday evening, right after Bet Online. I fired 6 bets in, what they allowed me to bet. I'm not afraid. I think I got a pretty good idea on how to do a power rating. Now, the big difference would be at the FBS level, week 3, week 4, if I make the number 3 and somebody hangs 2.5, I'm gonna fire away. FCS, I require a little bit bigger disparities as far as between my power rating, what the line on the game. If it's a big point spread, I'll give you an example. North Dakota State, Youngstown State, I did circa hung 27. I made it 24. Normally that would be a bet for me. I didn't, it's not like we're around a lot of key numbers there. I didn't, it wasn't an auto bet, even though I had 3 points of difference there between my line and what Circa originally hang there. So it requires a little bit more. I'm not betting on half points, at least at this point. Now, if it's week 8, if I'm talking here at the end of March and early April, I'll probably get to that point, but at least not early on the season. It requires me to have 3-4 points of difference, and usually with a little shorter numbers, not necessarily the big point spreads.
How quickly do you think overreaction will happen in this market? Because we always talk about it from an FBS standpoint of, you get that team in week 1 that loses to an FCS team, and everybody immediately discards that team for like 6-7 weeks in a row. And if you have the stones, you can play that team, and they usually wind up doing relatively well against the spread, unless they've absolutely bottomed out that season or something like that. But this will be a very inefficient market. This will be a market that people bet because it's football, because FCS is on. We know football is the cash cow in this business. So there will be a lot of, to put it nicely, uneducated money in this market that will push some of these things around, and probably some uneducated, deep-pocketed money with nothing better to do that doesn't really want to bet into basketball lines or something like that. So what do you think we kind of see as we go forward here? Will there be a lot of overreaction, you think?
There will be. I will disagree with you. The deep pockets probably won't enter this market too much. You just can't get enough down, in my opinion. We'll see. Maybe they open it up, the limits. If every shop's, you can get down couple G's and you got 10 different outs or whatever, I guess then theoretically you can get down at least a sizable chunk compared to the average guy on a game. There'll be overreaction. I'll give you an example right now, and then I'll talk about how inefficient the market is. But Tarleton State took a ton of money last week. They went from 2.5 point home underdogs to like a 3.5 point home favorite. Didn't win, didn't cash those tickets, but with a couple minutes left, when you're up 14, a lot of anybody that bet Tarleton State thought they should have won last week. We've already seen some money come in on them against New Mexico State, because Tarleton State was fresh in the minds. And I'm not talking public bettors. I'm talking, these are guys that do this professionally. I expect Tarleton State money to come in. I'm going to be against that. So I'm going to be probably on New Mexico State, but I need to see where this line ends up shaking out over the weekend. But I think that's going to be an overreaction on Tarleton State, who played, a mid-level FCS team that dealt with, historical as far as conditions. McNeese State, I mean, a lot of the reason that there was money on Tarleton State was a fade against a McNeese State program, lost like 20 guys over the course of the fall and whatnot. The reality is Tarleton State was a Division II team last year. Division II teams only are allowed 36 full scholarships. Now they're playing an FBS team, a very bad FBS team in New Mexico State. But I just think that gap between these programs should not have Tarleton State a favorite over New Mexico State. So if you're looking for a pick, I'd wait. I think you're going to get a better number on New Mexico State over the weekend. That's one where I think the market's going to be inefficient from the professional side that I'm going to look to take advantage of. And speaking of inefficiencies, this is how inefficient the FCS market is. There is a book that just posted lines this morning. They're posting lines on games that are canceled like yesterday. So that's how inefficient it is. I mean, they're just not up to the news.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And the nice thing is, early on in the week, like we've talked about before, you're betting against the book. Later on, You're betting against kind of everybody else. And there will be some people out there in the FCS market that are pretty sharp. I mean, there will be, like I said, some uneducated public money that bets it because it's football and you can. But there are some people that do follow this, league very, very closely and, will be able to take advantage of some of these markets. One other thing I want to ask you about here with regards to this week, South Dakota State, Northern Iowa on Friday night, line is 3 in that game. You mentioned Tarleton State, New Mexico State, 1.5. You got a 2.5 for Northwestern State and Lamar, 6.5 for Austin Peay and Tennessee Tech. You've got some familiarity with, at least a few of those games with teams in the same conference and stuff like that. All of these games, for the most part, conference play. But you've also got James Madison laying over 40, Wofford laying 3 scores, Elon laying 19, Furman laying 23, UT Martin laying almost 2 touchdowns. North Dakota State, a massive favorite in their game. What about early on in the year here, where I think there's a high degree of uncertainty really for both teams? Would you shy away from laying big favorite prices? Because the implication to me is if you're going to cover a big favorite number, then you better be in sync. You better have some kind of rhythm going on. I don't know if that'll be the case with, how unique all these circumstances are.
I agree. I'm just not a guy that's going to lay a big number traditionally. And I'm going to shy away as it is. Because, you got to be efficient to roll along there. Now, it works on the other side. If you're not hitting on all cylinders, even though you're the far superior program and team, what does that mean for the teams at the bottom of the FCS? I don't think that's necessarily good news. But, if you're asking me, I'm never going to be a guy that's firing away at a lot of 17-plus point favorites. I'm just not, at least early on this season, because of so much uncertainty. If there was one team that I might think about it, we'll see how low I doubt the number goes much lower than what it is now. But because it's below my original number, and there's probably going to be some expectation of game day money coming in on North Dakota State, I'm not going to have a big bet on it, but I'll bet a couple of pizzas probably on the Bison in that game. That'll be, if there's one team that I would, it'd probably be the best of the best. Because if there's one thing we've seen, Adam, regardless of sport, the favorites have done maybe not necessarily great against the spread, but overall, of course, the season, the rich have got richer and the poor have gotten poorer. Traditionally, across most sports during COVID, the favorites have basically come out on top in the end.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. You think of all the championship teams that we've seen here so far, and there have been virtually no surprises, at least in terms of the major North American sports. So I think that's an excellent point there. One other thing I want to ask you about, sides or totals? What are you focusing in on both right now? Do you feel like the sides are maybe a little bit better of numbers than the totals? What are you kind of seeing just as an overall observation, here with this first, full week of games?
Another great question. I'm more, just because most books have just sides only at this point, they won't post totals until game day. I am more focused on the sides at this point. that might change as we learn more and gather more data on the teams throughout the course of the next few weeks. But at least right now, I'm more focused on the sides. I mean, look, totals are going to be less inefficient than the sides, but at least I can get down decent enough money on the sides at a majority of the books. Where I mean, just an example, Circa only has the sides up right now. Westgate only has sides. South Point only has sides. I mean, you got to go Bet Online, DraftKings to find totals at this point. That's it. Most books, even Bookmaker and Chris is only offering sides. So just from that aspect, I'm more focused on that than I am the totals. I mean, weather, I'll be, if I'm going to play totals, obviously with some historic weather going on, and most of these games have just been canceled, that's what I'll be looking to take advantage. Just because, how often are we playing in February? And a lot of FCS is dealing with, parts of the country, that are a little bit colder than other parts, just put it that way.
No, that's an excellent point. Something I didn't really think about is, you think about a lot of these FCS schools, and in particular the ones that are playing, and they're across, the Great Plains in the Midwest and down in the Southeast, and of course in the state of Texas, where all hell is kind of broken loose here throughout this week with the weather. So yeah, that's a great point. Especially because these teams are used to starting out and kind of getting into rhythm when the weather's not bad. Now they've got to start out and try to get into rhythm when it's awful. So I think it's a really good point. We'll see what kind of happens here with these lines, with everything going on with this week. I guess the last thing I'll ask you here is, when do you expect line moves to start coming in? We're not going to be dealing with large limits. We're not going to be dealing with the same limit structure that we see for college football, where early people grab numbers at lower limits. Tuesday, things go up. Thursday, things go up again. And then, of course, at their highest point on game day. You expecting a lot of game day movement then for these games?
Oh, yeah, I do. I think a majority of it is going to be game day. I mean, guys like myself will shape it up early, and then there'll be hardly any movement on majority of the games. Obviously, injuries and other breaking news is going to impact the line. And then, guys like myself been into the market on a Tuesday or Wednesday or whenever they feel like releasing these lines. You're not going to see much for 2-3 days, and then game day. When limits open up a little bit, and plus you're going to get public betting. Is the public going to bet week one much? Probably not, but and I'm not sure that they're going to be heavily involved just because they're not on traditional. It's not like you're flicking on ESPN and see the game on. It's ESPN Plus and whatnot, so it'll be diehards. Let's just put it that way, and. I think it'll be a sharper market as far as who's necessarily betting. I just don't think, at least at this point, early on in the season, public will have too much of a say outside of maybe betting a team like North Dakota State.
All right, let's transition over to the college basketball side of things here for 15 or 20 minutes or so to finish up the show. And Brad, something that we talked about on Monday that I think is pretty interesting here is that a lot of conferences now sort of have the ball in their courts, pardon the pun, with regards to conference tournaments. If they want to have them, athletic departments will decide if they want to go, if they don't want to go, if they're going to opt out of the conference tournament. But these conferences, I guess, have until February 26th to decide if they want to have a conference tournament or if they just want to send the regular season champion. So this news should probably start breaking, I would say, middle of next week, where these conferences start deciding what they're going to do. But this is always such an interesting part of the college basketball season to me, because a lot of these really bad teams will just look at it and say, well, you know what? We're in the conference tournament anyway. That's kind of our shot. If we pull off a couple of upsets, go on some Cinderella run, something like that. So they kind of go through the motions to a degree late in the regular season. This year, I don't know what is going through the mindsets of a lot of these teams, of what they're thinking, especially in the low majors where conference tournaments, may kind of be hanging in the balance. It's just another one of those wrinkles in a COVID season that, makes handicapping college basketball that much more difficult.
Yeah, and I have not seen, has anybody opted out yet of the conference tournament? Any conferences?
I don't think so. The only I've seen that some conferences have kind of scaled them back a little bit. They're not going to take everybody. They'll take the top 8 or something. I know I saw the America East Conference, for example, since I wrote up a preview for Vermont and UMBC over at Bang the Book. I saw that they're doing like a championship pod and a playoff pod, And then I don't know if teams are playing into the playoff pod or what, but like their top 2 teams get automatic buys to the semifinals instead of having to play early. So there are some format changes at least.
Yeah. And obviously they're going to have to make these decisions quickly. I guess once those decisions are made, obviously I'd be more prone to if the sense of urgency is more up in as far as the last few games of the regular season, I mean, then that will impact my handicapping in that regard. But once until those announcements are made, it's not factored into how I'm thinking. What it does, moving forward, I mean, I'm looking at Gonzaga here. I mean, unless looking at KenPom, just looking at the official site for Gonzaga, they're wrapping up on Saturday. Are they playing any more games and before their conference tournament? Because I'll tell you this, for the overwhelming favorite to win it all, I mean, I'm not real pleased that, Gonzaga is wrapping up on Saturday, February the 20th, and then they'll play a conference tournament, 3 games, and then they're not going to play again until, the second, third week of March, the NCAA tournament. I don't think that's ideal for any of that. And that's what I'll be looking to take advantage of.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point because I was kind of looking at that too, where, you do have some teams that are done after this weekend or some teams that maybe play early next week. And then that's it, then they just wait around for their conference tournament. And that's a real dangerous thing because you've got to stay sharp. And I sort of wonder, we were talking about this on Monday's show. Like, if you're the West Coast Conference, right? Like Gonzaga's the number 1 seed. They could lose in the first round of the West Coast Conference tournament. Doesn't matter. They're a number 1 seed.
Yep.
Do you bother with a conference tournament that Gonzaga is probably going to win anyway? Or do you hope that something really crazy and freaky happens and like St. Mary's beats Gonzaga in the championship game or something like that, and you get 2 teams into the NCAA tournament field? These conferences that have, the OVC, for example, right? Yep. You probably want Belmont to go to the NCAA tournament because they're the best team that you've got. So do you just go ahead and say, well, you know what? We're not doing a conference tournament. Belmont won our regular season. They're going to go. And then it's like, okay, so Belmont goes, and that's cool because they're the best team for you. They also won't have played in like 2.5 weeks. So that's kind of, counterproductive to a team like Belmont's chances. So I'll be really interested, maybe less from a betting standpoint, more from kind of just a, general fascination standpoint, to see what these conferences decide to do. And if there are ways that it could impact our, game by game betting or the futures markets, then by all means, it's something I'll look to take advantage of.
Yeah, we've seen, obviously, COVID layoffs are different because you're missing practice and you've actually been sick and there's questionable conditioning, but still it's a negative. I mean, you don't play for 3-4 weeks, especially when you're hitting at this point in the season. A lot of teams are hitting their stride and then you're just not playing. I mean, it's a huge negative in my opinion, and I guess I'll be looking to take advantage of it if that is indeed the case for a lot of teams entering the NCAA tournament. It's going to be really interesting to see if a lot of conferences do away with it. My expectation and what you brought up makes more sense to me. I'd probably limit it a little bit more. I mean, do you really need to see the 9th or 10th or 11th best team in the conference? Do you really want to send them in there when it can only be a negative, knocking out your top team? I would say smaller conference tournaments would be the answer and maybe the best case for everybody. But I get what could be intriguing. You don't play it. I mean, in Gonzaga, if I'm Gonzaga, I'm looking to play somebody else that's looking for a game. I mean, we saw North Carolina pick up a game. I know they're only playing Northeastern, but maybe Gonzaga can pick up a game against a major conference team. I mean, that would be the ideal thing for Gonzaga to sharpen them up before the NCAA tournament.
No, that's an excellent point. That's a good point that you brought up there. I just, I sort of wonder. I mean, like, I don't know how much of this information we're going to know. It may just be kind of a watch and wait type of thing. But some of these teams that are god-awful, these teams that are, the bottom 100 in college basketball, something like that, how invested are they in the rest of this season? It's obviously been a long year anyway with COVID, with being restricted, not being able to live that college life when you do get downtime, all of that. And you also suck at basketball. do those teams, those big underdogs, just get completely railroaded and run off the floor in a lot of these games that are remaining? Or, do some of them play for pride? I don't really know, if we're going to find out too much of that information ahead of time. It may be something that, we see after the fact, but there's also that too of, these teams that are maybe on the bubble. Look, you get a chance to play in the NCAA tournament, no matter under what circumstances, you're going to do it. If you're a team that's absolutely not going anywhere, you may just kind of want to pack this thing in.
Yeah, I'm not going to be, prone to betting on the teams at the bottom. We're typically, maybe you can find some value because, the market doesn't want to bet on these teams, but I would be less inclined to bet them in this type of season. I'll use an example. It's not a good one because I got very fortunate yesterday to win. But, a team like New Mexico, where there's been, rumors that they've wanted to opt out of the season, I got very lucky that it went to overtime and I cashed a ticket on Wyoming. But, I'm looking to fade those teams. That was one instance yesterday where, I'm questioning whether a team wants to finish the season. And if that's the case, I think that's going to be the case for a lot of teams here down in the last couple of weeks. So I'm looking to take advantage of it. I counted my lucky stars last night getting a win against it. But, yeah, I think it's a legitimate thing that's going to be factored into my handicapping process.
Yeah, I think it has to be, and that's something that, a lot of these metric sites just can't really build in.
No, they can't.
And that's something that, that's part of the handicapping process. And is it quantifiable? No, probably not. But, if it is an angle that is out there where you see a team that you feel like just isn't fully invested, isn't fully engaged, a team that's maybe fallen well short of expectations. I look at a team like Butler last night. Marquette was they were spiraling out of control. Marquette had not been playing well at all. Butler, a team that has fallen off quite a bit, they're not accustomed to being in this position in mid-February. They're used to being a good team, being in that tournament discussion. Here they're not, and they're not ready to play last night against a Marquette team that, obviously had its back against the wall in terms of trying to right the ship with how poorly they'd been playing. And Marquette's up 16 at the break, wins the game by 16 as a 2-point dog. I think there are some spots that you can take a look at like that here where there are teams that are used to being at a certain level, used to being at a certain threshold, and because they're not, I don't think we're going to get their best foot forward.
And we've seen that with the Blue Bloods, like we talked last week. The Michigan States, the Kentuckys, the Dukes of the world, not used to being in this spot. Market wants to bet on them because they're used to it and they're looking for regression towards the mean. And hey, it's a very unique season. It's almost kind of like, and I'll say this, and all three of those teams will go on a big run. Duke's playing a little bit better now, but we haven't seen tremendous value for a lot of those teams. In fact, the value's been fading them. It's been really good. We've decided to fade those teams. So I'm glad that you brought that example. And we saw it even on the college football level, like the Michigans of the world. It's just, didn't have it and wasn't going to get better anytime soon throughout the course of the season. It's almost kind of like a write-off type of year.
Well, and I think something else that's really interesting too, and obviously a lot of people have, given their thoughts on Jalen Johnson and him opting out for Duke. But you know what? When a guy doesn't really want to be there and he's still playing, a significant portion of the minutes and being a big part of what's happening on the floor and all of that, that has a really negative impact on the rest of the team. And Duke last night took money against Wake Forest, blew Wake Forest out, won the first half by 19. They didn't look like a team that was going to miss Jalen Johnson. They were probably fine with the fact that he was gone. And you think about a team like Little Rock, for example, where they didn't look very good in their first game against Arkansas State on Friday of last week, but they were a little bit better on Saturday. They're just, not a particularly strong team overall. But Marquise Noel left the program. And that was a guy who was, kind of a malcontent with that team. He kind of wanted out, didn't really want to be there anymore. You sort of wonder now, after a full week of practice, after, talking with the coach and saying, look, you are the guys that still want to be here. Maybe they play really well this weekend against Louisiana Monroe. So these opt-outs, if they are bigger names, higher usage players, they hurt the talent level of the team. But at the same time, these kids aren't stupid. They know when guys don't want to be there. They know what kind of impact that has. So those are things that I think may be blessings in disguise for some of these teams. And maybe it happens here for Little Rock this weekend, for example.
I love that I hope people listening really appreciate the depth of knowledge that Adam Burke has. I mean, he's writing a baseball preview guide, a long one, we were talking hundreds of pages at its conclusion. And he's spouting off players from Arkansas, Little Rock, and basketball, a college basketball sport that, I think it's safe to say that it's not one of your favorites. I mean, I just hope people appreciate you.
No, I appreciate that, man. Thanks so much for that kind comment there. One other thing I wanted to talk about real quickly, I wrote up a preview of yesterday's Valparaiso and Loyola Chicago game over at bangthebook.com. And, I'm looking at it. And first of all, Loyola Chicago off of, 2 games against the second best team, I would say, in the Missouri Valley and Drake. And they blew them out in the first game, lost the second game by a point. Neither team was really at full strength, I don't think, in that second game. But then Loyola's laying 20.5 against Valparaiso. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, okay, maybe the letdown factor doesn't necessarily work out here, but this team is being asked to cover 20.5 points in a game that's probably going to be played to 64, 65 possessions, something like that. Game winds up getting played to 56 possessions. Valpo almost wins the game outright. But you and I were talking about this before the show, that pace and tempo are very much factored into the total for a game. Does it feel to me like they're factored into the side to the same degree?
No, they're not. And usually, it's whatever the KenPom number, as long as there's not an injury, it's whatever that spits out. And I think with Loyola Chicago, I think some of the money on them was bounce back spot after a rare loss for them, which, might have been a little bit misguided. Obviously was. I mean, if you look at the final. Yeah, I'll tell you this. I don't think about it all the time, but it certainly enters my thought process a lot. Is, if I'm looking to back a big favorite or a big underdog, I immediately go to tempo. Is it going to be a slower paced game? Because if I'm taking that opportunity with a bigger favorite or a bigger dog, I'm always going to look at tempo. I mean, how many possessions is the favorite going to be able to exert its will, its superiority over the weaker team, regardless of whether, it works to both sides there. So, yeah, I think that factors in a lot of times to, my college football handicapping, teams that are looking to run pace, and specifically the Missouri Valley Conference. A lot of things have changed over the last 20 years. One thing that hasn't, if you're looking for one of the slowest tempo conferences in all of college basketball, it's the Missouri Valley. There's not a single team this season that's in the top 125 of college basketball as far as adjusted tempo rankings. I mean, they notoriously run slower tempos, and even though Loyola was getting margin on a lot of teams, man, and that was a really good spot. And hindsight's always 20/20, but I'm a little ticked at myself that I didn't take advantage of that.
Well, and then there's one game tonight. We transition into looking at a couple of games tonight, one that I'm kind of interested in, and then we'll talk about one that Brad's interested in. But along those same lines, St. Mary's and Gonzaga play tonight. And this Gonzaga 20.5 point favorite, total 141.5. And this total did go up initially, now has come back down. It peaked at 144, now sitting 141.5. Look, Gonzaga is an elite team. They could win this game by 40 or 50, and I would not be the least bit surprised. However, when you look at the first meeting between the two teams back on January 16th, it was played to 67 possessions, the slowest game of the year for Gonzaga. And we know that St. Mary's plays at a very, very slow tempo. No, they're not as good as they've been in the past, and they are recently coming off of a big COVID pause where they lost to Pepperdine the other night by a bucket, where they hadn't played in about 3 weeks, it looks like. So, yeah, maybe St. Mary's isn't in great rhythm. Maybe they can't keep up from an efficiency standpoint. But again, we're asking Gonzaga to cover 20.5 here in a game that will be played to one of their slowest tempos of the season. And to me, again, maybe St. Mary's just isn't good enough. Maybe Gonzaga is that good, being the best offensive team in the country. But I just look at a spot like that, and I have to say to myself, Gonzaga has to be stunningly efficient to cover a number this big in a game that's going to be probably 67, 68 possessions. I'm going to take a look at St. Mary's in that spot. And like I said, they could get blown off the court. It's certainly possible. But that's one where I just look at the tempo, I look at the spread, and I say to myself, It's easy for Gonzaga to cover 20 and a half if this game is played to 80 possessions. It won't be. So to me, I just sort of look for those opportunities from a side standpoint.
Makes a lot of sense. You want me over. So much that I'm going to bet St. Mary's and release them to my clients. And I'm just looking at Gonzaga's schedule. This is how efficient they've been offensively. They've only had 3 games out of 20 where they've scored less than 85 points. Now, all of those games, did they get enough margin to cover a 20-point spread? No, they didn't. So it makes sense that, it's very tough to get. Sometimes it's just, don't overthink things. Obviously the projection tonight is they're not going to get to 85 points. And if that's the case, then, I really like my St. Mary's bet. So I like the way you came at that. My only concern is, there's not a lot of games left where Gonzaga can really, flex their muscle. Obviously a St. Mary's program that they probably consider to be their rival in the West Coast Conference, their arch rival. It all becomes a mentality. If they really want to put one on St. Mary's, they're fully capable of it. But I think if it just plays out as expected with a slower tempo style, you're right. They're going to have one of those games where they shoot well over 50% from the field.
All right, so there's a game you're looking at tonight, too, also out there on the West Coast. This one in the Pac-12 between Colorado and Oregon. What are your thoughts here on game 785, 786?
Yeah, I like Oregon here and I bet Oregon. I was in love with the game prior to Colorado, a team that's very high variance, losing, as a big favorite. Third time they've done that here in the last month outright to Cal. But even with that said, I just think moving forward, I'm going to be on Oregon more often than not. Why? 4 of Oregon's top 5 players has missed action this year. They have never really fully been healthy. I think Oregon, when they are healthy, is probably the best team in the Pac-12, although USC is playing really well right now. But you look at, a Will Richardson missed most of the season for them, a guy that was expected to be a major contributor. He's only played the last 4 games. He missed all the first part of the season. And now it's finally healthy. He's played the last 4 games. Last 3 have been 3 of the better performances Oregon's had all season. I'm looking to bet on an Oregon team that I thought was the best team in the Pac-12 coming into the season. And because of injuries and also a COVID shutdown, they went through a course of a period of a month where they had 6 games postponed because of COVID, either their, COVID issues or their opponents. I think now that they're starting to gel and get together, I think an Oregon team is going to be a team that I'm going to be looking to play on consistently down the stretch.
Well, and that circles us back to Monday when we talked with Kyle Hunter about teams that do really well, coaches that do really well against the spread late in the season. This is only game number 17 for Oregon this year. After game 18 was our sample size on Monday, but the number 1 ATS coach after game 18 in college basketball was Dana Altman. So this is only game 17 for Oregon, but he's very good late February and into March.
He's not, at least to the real general fan probably knows of the name, but I just think he's probably one of the most underrated coaches in all of college basketball. It's not like he's a 5-year wonder. He's been doing it for 20 plus years, whether at Creighton or Oregon now. An elite coach that doesn't get treated that way in the marketplace. And no surprise there that he's really good against the spread.
Brad Powers, professional bettor and handicapper over at bradpowersports.com. We had to kind of rig the show up in a different way today, but I appreciate you sticking it out with me and making some adjustments here. What's happening over at the website right now, man?
Yeah, website right now, a couple things. If you're interested in just football, if you're a football only type of person, whether it be the NFL or college football newsletter, that's available for $69. It's a weekly newsletter during the season, monthly during the off season. You want college hoops, you want FCS, because I'm just going to, anytime I see a good bet in the FCS, I'm just going to release it, on my college basketball card. If you're interested in college hoops and FCS action the next couple months, or at least the next 6 weeks, it's $79. You get in daily updates as far as daily picks and whatnot, daily info on games. And you can check that all out at bradpowersports.com.
Make sure you follow Brad on Twitter at Brad Powers and the number 7 as well. And speaking of Twitter, real quickly here, some breaking news as we're doing the show.
Oh.
Carson Wentz traded to the Indianapolis Colts. So he's reunited with Frank Reich. So what do you think about
that's
that?
the only spot where I thought I would consider upgrading the team with Carson Wentz. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
That can work there. Because I think Frank Reich is one of the better coaches. Doesn't get often priced that way in the market, but I think he's one of the more undervalued coaches. So good move for the Colts. I'm not saying that they're a Super Bowl contender all of a sudden, but they're certainly. I'm not going to downgrade the Indies, the power rating. Let's put it that way, and I'm going to actually upgrade it.
2021 third and a conditional 22 second that could turn into a first was the cost for Carson Wentz there. And of course, now Jalen Hurts, QB1 for the Philadelphia Eagles. So we'll see how that winds up going as well. But a little bit of breaking news out there on social media. So that's how we finish up the show. And a good show at that, I think, with Brad Powers again, at Brad Powers, the number 7 on Twitter, and BradPowerSports.com is the website. Brad, always a pleasure, brother. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll talk to you again next week.
Thanks so much for having me.
There you go. Once again, at Brad Powers and the number 7 on Twitter, BradPowerSports.com is the website. Still not sure what to do with the Friday show yet, which usually means I default to doing it myself. So maybe I'll start things off early on Friday morning with some additional baseball thoughts, maybe talk about NBA, NHL heading into the weekend, something like that. I'll figure something out to get some content out to our loyal listeners here to finish out the week. That'll do it for me. Thank you so much for listening, everybody, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.